A millionaire CEO was grieving his daughter's death until a little girl knocked on his mansion's door. "I've never missed home this much before." He turns pale. "Just before we start, drop a flag emoji that represents your country." The sun was setting over the sprawling Reynolds estate, casting long shadows across the immaculately kept gardens. Inside his mahogany-paneled office, Garrett Reynolds stared absently at financial reports that no longer seemed to matter. 2 weeks had passed since he'd buried his daughter, but the world around him still felt unreal, as if he were moving through a thick fog. The silence in the mansion was deafening. His staff had been given time off, all except Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper who insisted on staying to keep things running. Even William, his loyal butler of 15 years, had been persuaded to visit his sister in Vermont. Garrett preferred it this way. The emptiness matched his heart. The sudden chime of the doorbell startled him. Garrett glanced at his watch. 7:43 p.m. Who would come unannounced at this hour? With a sigh, he pushed himself away from his desk. Without William present, he'd have to answer it himself. The grand foyer echoed with his footsteps as he approached the massive oak door. When he pulled it open, the evening breeze carried in the scent of approaching rain, and standing there, barely reaching his waist, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with untamed golden curls and large, expressive eyes that stared up at him. In her arms, she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, its fabric thin from years of loving. "Never felt so homesick before," she said simply, her voice small but clear in the evening air. Garrett's world tilted. The floor beneath him seemed to shift, and he had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. Those eyes, that face, the particular way her nose crinkled when she spoke. It was impossible, completely impossible. She was the mirror image of Charlotte. "Are you okay, mister?" the little girl asked, taking a half-step back, suddenly uncertain. Garrett struggled to find his voice. Who are you? Where are your parents?" "I'm Ellie," she replied, hugging her stuffed rabbit tighter. "I don't know where they are. I'm hungry. Can I come in?" A million questions raced through Garrett's mind. How had she gotten past the security gate? Where had she come from? And most importantly, how could she look so exactly like his daughter that it made his heart physically ache? "I shouldn't be talking to strangers," Ellie continued, filling his shocked silence. "But you don't feel like a stranger. Does that make sense?" It didn't. None of this made sense. But Garrett found himself stepping aside, allowing this ghost-like apparition into his home. "Are you hungry, Ellie?" he managed. "To ask?" His voice barely above a whisper, she nodded, following him with the confident steps of someone who belonged there. And as thunder rumbled in the distance, Garrett Reynolds, billionaire CEO, grieving father, closed the door on the approaching storm, unaware that his life had just changed forever. Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened when she spotted Ellie sitting at the kitchen island, swinging her legs as she devoured a sandwich. The housekeeper's gaze darted to Garrett, a silent question hanging between them. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Ellie. She'll be staying with us tonight," Garrett said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Would you mind preparing the blue guest room?" The older woman hesitated, studying the child's face. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds," she finally replied, her voice carefully controlled. "Though perhaps the blue room isn't the best choice. It gets rather drafty." Garrett understood her meaning. The blue room was adjacent to Charlotte's bedroom, a room he hadn't been able to enter since the funeral. While Mrs. Peterson busied herself upstairs, Garrett sat across from Ellie, watching her eat. Each gesture, each mannerism was hauntingly familiar. The way she cut her sandwich into triangles before eating, how she wrinkled her nose slightly when taking a bite. These weren't just similarities, they were exact replications of Charlotte's behaviors. "Where did you come from, Ellie?" he asked gently. "From the Millers," she said between bites. They weren't very nice. Your adoptive parents? When she nodded, he continued, And how did you get here to this house? Ellie shrugged. I just knew where to go. A chill ran down Garrett's spine. Should we call the police? They could help find your family. Please don't, she whispered, suddenly looking terrified. They'll just send me back, or worse. Later that night, as rain lashed against the windows, Garrett sat in his study with a glass of whiskey, lost in memories. 5 years ago, everything had been perfect. Rebecca's laughter filling their home, Charlotte taking her first steps across. This very room, his company thriving beyond his wildest dreams. Then came the arguments with Rebecca. Her increasing paranoia about Charlotte's safety, the therapy sessions that didn't seem to help, and finally, 2 weeks ago, the call that shattered his world. A car accident on Lakeside Drive. Charlotte gone instantly. Rebecca inconsolable, leaving for her sister's home in Europe, unable to remain in a house filled with memories. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Reynolds? Mrs. Peterson stood in the doorway. The child, she refused to sleep in the guest room. I found her in Charlotte's bed. Her voice broke slightly. Should I move her? Garrett closed his eyes, feeling the weight of grief press down on him again. No, he finally said, let her sleep where she's comfortable. Later, he found himself standing outside Charlotte's room, the door slightly ajar. Inside, Ellie slept peacefully, curled around her stuffed rabbit, bathed in moonlight, filtering through the curtains Charlotte had picked herself. Who are you? He whispered to the sleeping child who wore his daughter's face. What am I supposed to do with you? As if sensing his presence, Ellie stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep. I'm home now. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he would call the authorities and do the right thing. But tonight, just for tonight, he would allow himself this impossible comfort, the illusion that death had somehow given back what it had taken. Morning sunlight streamed through the bay windows of the dining room as Garrett watched Ellie meticulously arrange her pancakes, chocolate chips forming a smiley face, just as Charlotte had always done. He hadn't instructed Mrs. Peterson to prepare them this way. Somehow she had known. Did you sleep well? Garrett asked, attempting to maintain some semblance of normalcy. The stars on the ceiling glow really bright, Ellie replied, drizzling maple syrup in a spiral pattern. I counted all 37 of them. Garrett nearly choked on his coffee. The glow-in-the-dark constellation on Charlotte's ceiling had been their special project. Exactly 37 stars arranged to match the Big Dipper and surrounding stars as seen from their summer cabin in Maine. Ellie, he began carefully, can you tell me more about the Millers? The people who took care of you? Her small shoulders tensed. They weren't nice. They only wanted the money. What money? The money people gave them for keeping me. She stabbed at a chocolate chip with her fork. They had other kids too sometimes. Kids that didn't belong to them. A cold feeling settled in Garrett's stomach. The implications were disturbing. Did they hurt you? He asked, keeping his voice gentle, despite the anger building inside him. Ellie shook her head. Not really. They just forgot about me a lot. Sometimes there wasn't food. Her expression brightened suddenly. Can we go to the secret place today? What secret place? Behind the bookshelf in the library, where the toy train is hidden. Garrett felt the room spin slightly. Charlotte's hiding spot, a small alcove behind a false panel in the library bookcase, had been their secret. Even Rebecca didn't know about the vintage toy train set he'd stashed there for Charlotte's upcoming birthday. A birthday she never lived to see. How do you know about that? He whispered. Ellie shrugged, her expression innocent. I just know. Like I knew how to find this house. The front door opened with the familiar sound of keys jingling. William had returned. The butler's footsteps echoed through the foyer, then stopped abruptly as he entered the dining room and saw Ellie, Good heavens, he breathed, his usually impassive face showing shock. William, this is Ellie, Garrett said. She'll be staying with us for a while. The butler recovered quickly, slipping back into his professional demeanor. Very good, sir. Shall I prepare the guest room? That won't be necessary. She's using Charlotte's room. Later, while Ellie explored the garden under Mrs. Peterson's watchful eye, William cornered Garrett in his study. Sir, forgive my directness, but who is this child? The resemblance is uncanny. I don't know, William. She showed up last night alone. Have you contacted the authorities? Surely someone is looking for her. Garrett turned to the window, watching. Ellie carefully examining a butterfly that had landed on the rose bush, Charlotte's favorite spot in the garden. I will tomorrow. William's reflection in the window showed his concerned frown. Mr. Reynolds, with all due respect, this isn't healthy. The grief counselor warned about seeking substitutes for... She knew about the train, William, Garrett interrupted. The one in the hiding place. No one knew about that except Charlotte and me. Later that afternoon, Ellie led Garrett directly to the hidden panel in the library. Without hesitation, her small fingers found the concealed latch that had taken him days to install, so that it would be invisible to the casual observer. How? Garrett asked as the panel swung open, revealing the untouched train set. How did you know? Ellie looked up at him, her eyes, Charlotte's eyes, filled with a wisdom no 7-year-old should possess. I just knew, she said simply. Like I know you're sad, but not as sad as yesterday. The ticking of the grandfather clock was the only sound in Garrett's study as he stared at the adoption papers spread across his desk. Marcus Doyle sat opposite him, his weathered face grave. The ex-homicide detective had agreed to investigate Ellie's background as a favor to Garrett, who had once helped clear his son of fraud charges. These documents are forgeries, Marcus said, tapping a finger on the papers. Good ones, but definitely fake. The seal is wrong, and the judge who supposedly signed off on this adoption retired 2 years before the date on these papers. Garrett rubbed his temples. What about the Millers? James and Teresa Miller. They've moved around a lot. 5 states in 7 years, always living just below the radar. I've got a contact at Child Protective Services looking into them, but my gut says they're involved in something ugly. A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Peterson stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Sir, the child is asking for her bedtime story. I offered to read to her, but she's quite insistent that it should be you. Garrett nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'll be right there. Turning back to Marcus, he added, Keep digging. I need to know where she came from. In Charlotte's bedroom, Ellie sat cross-legged on the bed, already in pajamas that Mrs. Peterson had purchased that afternoon. Her stuffed rabbit lay beside her, looking oddly at home among Charlotte's toys. Mrs. Peterson says you tell the best stories, Ellie said, scooting over to make room. Garrett sat on the edge of the bed, reaching automatically for The Secret Garden, Charlotte's favorite. This one? Ellie nodded enthusiastically. The part where Mary finds the key, please. He opened the book to the exact chapter, the worn spine falling open naturally to the page Charlotte had requested night after night. As he read, Ellie mouthed certain passages along with him, her eyes half closed in contentment. When the chapter ended, Ellie yawned and snuggled deeper under the covers. Can you sing the song now? What song? Garrett asked, though a part of him already knew. The one about the moon watching over me when I sleep, the one Mom always sang. Garrett's throat tightened. Rebecca had composed that lullaby herself for Charlotte, with lyrics about moonbeams and guardian stars. No one else knew it, not even Mrs. Peterson or William. How do you know about that song, Ellie? Her eyelids were growing heavy. My mom used to sing it to me in my dreams. When I was scared at the Millers, I could hear her singing it. After Ellie had fallen asleep, Garrett returned to his study where Marcus was examining photographs. Found these in her backpack, Marcus said, passing a small envelope to Garrett. Baby pictures mostly. The photos were worn and creased, Ellie as an infant, as a toddler. In one image, a hospital bracelet was partially visible around her tiny wrist. Garrett squinted at the blurry ID code. Can we enhance this? Already sent. It to my tech guy. Should hear back tomorrow. Marcus gathered his notes. There's one more thing. The Millers didn't just have Ellie. According to my CPS contact, at least 7 children have passed through their home in the last decade, all with questionable paperwork. Human trafficking? Possibly. Or something even more targeted. Marcus hesitated. Garrett, I have to ask, when did you and Rebecca learn that Charlotte had died? 2 weeks ago. The police came to the door around midnight. There had been an accident. His voice faltered. Why? Because according to my preliminary timeline, Ellie left the Millers 3 days after Charlotte's accident. Almost as if. Marcus trailed off. As if what? As if she somehow knew she needed to find you. That night, Garrett couldn't sleep. He kept returning to Ellie's room, watching her breathe, studying her face in the moonlight. The resemblance wasn't just physical. It was in her mannerisms, her preferences, her knowledge of things only Charlotte should know. Tomorrow, he promised himself again. Tomorrow, he would call the authorities. But as dawn approached, Garrett knew he was lying to himself. Something inexplicable was happening, and until he understood what it was, Ellie would remain under his protection. Garrett was reviewing quarterly projections on his tablet when he heard the crash from upstairs, followed by Mrs. Peterson's alarmed call. "Mr. Reynolds, come quickly!" He took the stairs, 2 at a time, heart pounding. In the hallway outside Charlotte's room, he found Mrs. Peterson kneeling beside Ellie, who lay crumpled on the floor. Her face was flushed, golden curls plastered to her forehead. With sweat, she was fine 1 minute, then just collapsed, Mrs. Peterson explained, her voice trembling. "She's burning with fever." Garrett gathered Ellie into his arms, alarmed at the heat radiating from her small body. "Call Dr. Bennett," he instructed. "Tell him it's an emergency." 20 minutes later, Dr. Bennett, who had been the Reynolds family, physician for over a decade, was examining Ellie in Charlotte's bed. His face remained professionally neutral, but Garrett didn't miss the momentary shock when he'd first seen the child. 4-2, Dr. Bennett announced, reading the thermometer. "Quite high. How long has she been ill?" "She was fine at breakfast," Garrett replied, anxiety tightening his chest. This came on suddenly. Dr. Bennett frowned, listening to Ellie's lungs with his stethoscope. "Her breathing is slightly labored. Could be a severe viral infection or early pneumonia." He glanced up at Garrett. "She should really be in a hospital, Garrett." "No hospitals," Garrett said firmly. "Whatever she needs, we'll handle it here." The doctor's eyebrows rose, but he continued his examination. "I'm going to need to check for rashes. Could you help me turn her?" As they gently rolled Ellie onto her side, the collar of her pajama top slipped, revealing her shoulder. Dr. Bennett froze, staring at a small star-shaped birthmark. "Is that—" He didn't finish the question, but his eyes met Garrett's. "Yes," Garrett confirmed quietly. "Identical to Charlotte's." Dr. Bennett's professional composure faltered. He had delivered Charlotte, had been her doctor since birth. He knew the significance of what he was seeing. "Garrett," he said carefully, "I don't want to overstep, but I have to ask, who is this child?" "Her name is Ellie. She showed up at my door 3 nights ago." Garrett ran a hand through his hair. "I know how it looks, James. I know what you're thinking, that grief has made me see similarities that aren't there. But it's more than that. She knows things only Charlotte could know. Dr. Bennett prepared an injection of antibiotics. Childhood leukemia can present with sudden high fevers," he said, seemingly changing the subject. "When Charlotte was 4, we tested her because of recurring infections, remember?" Garrett nodded, the memory still painful. 3 days of waiting for results, worst days of my life, until the accident. The relief when those tests came back negative was palpable, but during those tests we collected comprehensive genetic data. Dr. Bennett administered the injection with practiced ease. I still have those samples, Garrett, if you wanted to compare. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Do it, Garrett whispered. Later that evening, Ellie's fever began to break. She drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words that made no sense. Garrett remained by her bedside, sponging her forehead with cool water, the way he had done when Charlotte had been ill. His phone vibrated with an incoming text from Marcus. Found something. The Millers were arrested 6 months ago in Arizona. Charges include child endangerment and trafficking. Several children have been recovered, but records are inconsistent. Continuing to investigate. Garrett stared at the message, a cold dread settling in his stomach. What kind of people had Ellie been living with, and how many other children had suffered at their hands? Ellie stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment they were unfocused. Then they found Garrett's face. "Daddy," she whispered, before slipping back into sleep. Garrett sat perfectly still, the word echoing in his mind. Not Mr. or Mr. Reynolds, but Daddy, spoken with such natural familiarity that it broke something open inside him. "I'm here," he whispered back, though she couldn't hear him. "I'm right here." The morning sun streamed through Charlotte's bedroom curtains, casting patterns across the carpet where Garrett and Ellie sat hunched over a chessboard. 3 days had passed since her fever broke, and her recovery had been remarkably swift, resilient, Dr. Bennett had called her, though his eyes had held questions he didn't voice. "The horsey can move like this, right?" Ellie asked, making an L-shaped motion with her finger. "That's right. The knight moves in an L pattern," Garrett confirmed, watching her study the board with the same intense concentration Charlotte had always shown. Ellie picked up the knight, hesitated for a moment, then placed it precisely 3 squares forward and 1 to the left, Charlotte's favorite opening move. "Like that?" Garrett's breath caught. "Yes, exactly like that." He cleared his throat. "Where did you learn to play chess?" Ellie shrugged. "I don't know. I just remember the pieces moving like this." She traced another L in the air. "Is it my imagination, or did I play this before?" From the doorway, Mrs. Peterson watched with a mixture of concern and wonder. Over the past week, the housekeeper had transformed from skeptical to protective of Ellie, often sitting with her, while Garrett handled business calls. "Lunch is ready whenever you two are," she announced. "Grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles, just how Miss Ellie likes them." "With the crusts off?" Ellie asked hopefully. "Of course, dear, I haven't forgotten." But Mrs. Peterson had never asked Ellie how she preferred her sandwiches. She had simply prepared them the way Charlotte had always requested. After lunch, Garrett read to Ellie from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, another of Charlotte's favorites. As he reached the description of Narnia under snow, Ellie interrupted, "Always winter but never Christmas," she quoted, her voice overlapping with Garrett's reading of the exact same line. He lowered the book. "Ellie, have you read this before?" She frowned slightly. "I don't think so. The Millers didn't have books." Her expression brightened. "Maybe someone read it to me when I was little, before the Millers?" That evening, while Ellie helped Mrs. Peterson bake cookies, another activity Charlotte had loved, William approached Garrett in his study. "Sir, I hope you don't mind my saying, but you seem different these past few days." Garrett looked up from his laptop. "Different how?" "More present, sir. Since Miss Charlotte's passing, you've been, forgive me, almost like a ghost yourself. But now—" William gestured vaguely. "It's good to see you engaged again." Garrett hadn't realized how noticeable his depression had been, nor how quickly Ellie had begun to lift it. The constant crushing weight of grief still pressed upon him, but it was now punctuated by moments of genuine joy, like watching Ellie discover the koi pond or teaching her how to play the piano. "She's not a replacement, William," Garrett said, softly addressing the unspoken concern. "I know that." "Of course not, sir." William hesitated. "May I ask what you intend to do about her situation?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Ellie's laughter echoed from the kitchen. Later that night, after tucking Ellie in, Garrett found her sitting up in bed, a troubled expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I had a dream last night," she said quietly, "about a girl who looks just like me. She was calling my name, telling me to come home, but I couldn't reach her. There was a glass wall between us." Her eyes met Garrett's. She looked sad, like she was lost. "Is that weird?" Garrett carefully controlled his expression. "Dreams can be strange sometimes. She called me her sister," Ellie continued, "and she said we were both waiting to come home." She clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter. "Do you think dreams can be real sometimes?" Garrett smoothed her hair gently. "I think," he said carefully, "that there are some things in this world we don't fully understand." As Ellie drifted to sleep, Garrett remained by her side, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her chest, wondering what secrets lay hidden behind her dreams, and what painful truths awaited them both when those secrets finally emerged. Rain lashed against the windows of Garrett's study as Marcus spread documents across the desk. Outside, thunder rumbled, a perfect backdrop to the storm brewing within the room itself. The hospital where Charlotte was born had an internal investigation 7 years ago, Marcus explained, pointing to a heavily redacted report. "It was never made public, but my contact in hospital administration finally came through with details." Garrett leaned forward. "What kind of investigation?" "Possible baby switching." Marcus's tone was grave. "There were concerns about procedures in the maternity ward around the time Charlotte was born. The hospital conducted a quiet review, reached out to potentially affected families. We were never contacted," Garrett said, frowning. "According to this, Rebecca was approached, privately, without your knowledge." Marcus slid another document forward. "She declined further investigation, insisted that Charlotte was definitely your biological child." Garrett sat back, stunned. "Rebecca never mentioned this. Why would she hide it from me?" "There's more. The doctor who delivered Charlotte, Dr. Lawrence, was dismissed from the hospital 6 months after the internal review. Officially for professional negligence, but my source suggests it was connected to several irregularities in the maternity ward." Marcus passed him a photograph of a middle-aged man with steel-rimmed glasses and a clinical smile. "Dr. Alan Lawrence, board-certified, impeccable credentials, worked at 3 prestigious hospitals. After his dismissal, he dropped off the radar. Last known location was a private clinic in South America." Garrett stared at the face of the man who had delivered his daughter, and perhaps held answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. "What does this have to do with Ellie?" he finally asked. "I'm still putting pieces together, but—" Marcus was interrupted by a soft knock. Ellie stood in the doorway, clutching her rabbit. "I found something," she said, her voice small. "Something that feels important." She approached Garrett's desk, carefully avoiding the scattered papers, and placed a worn, leather-bound book before him. It was under the floorboard in the window seat. Garrett recognized it immediately. Rebecca's journal. She'd kept one for years, though he had always respected her privacy by never reading it. He hadn't even known where she kept it. "How did—" "You'd know it was there, Ellie," she shrugged. "I just knew, like I know other things." After Ellie had been escorted back to her room by Mrs. Peterson, Garrett carefully opened the journal, turning to entries from 7 years ago when Charlotte was born. April 15th. 2 heartbeats. "I heard them clearly before they gave me the sedative." "Why won't anyone acknowledge what I heard?" G thinks I'm being paranoid, but a mother knows. June 3rd. Dr. L finally admitted something might have happened. Not twins, he says, but irregularities during delivery. What does that mean? He suggested private testing, but warned it could open Pandora's box. I'm terrified of what we might find. August 12th. Made my decision. One healthy child is a blessing. Pursuing this will only bring pain. The angels must be protected, even if it means one remains hidden. Some sacrifices are necessary. G must never know my doubts. Garrett's hands trembled as he closed the journal. Angels, he whispered. She referred to Charlotte as her little angel from the day she was born. Marcus leaned forward. Garrett, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but a crash from upstairs interrupted him. They rushed to find Ellie in Rebecca's dressing room, standing amidst scattered jewelry. At her feet lay an ornate music box, its lid open, a tinkling melody filling the air. I'm sorry, Ellie said quickly. I was looking for the other half. Other half of what? Garrett asked gently. The music box. This one only plays half the song. Her fingers traced the inlaid pattern on the lid. There's another one that plays the rest. Garrett shook his head. This was Rebecca's grandmother's. It's one of a kind. No, Ellie insisted. There's another one. The song isn't complete without it. She hummed the familiar melody, then continued with a section Garrett had never heard, a perfect continuation of the tune. Later, after Ellie was asleep, Garrett and Marcus sat in stunned silence. DNA results should be back tomorrow, Marcus finally said, but I think we both know what they'll show. Twins, Garrett whispered. Charlotte had a twin sister that we never knew about. The question is, Marcus replied, how did one twin end up with the Millers, and why was her existence kept secret from you? As if in answer, Garrett's phone chimed with a message from Rebecca. Coming home tomorrow. We need to talk. The crunch of tires on gravel announced Rebecca's arrival. Garrett stood in the foyer, a tumult of emotions churning within him, anger, confusion, hope, betrayal. Through the leaded glass panels flanking the front door, he watched as his wife emerged from the taxi, her once vibrant presence now subdued. 2 weeks in Europe had done little to ease the grief etched into her face. William opened the door, his professional demeanor betraying nothing of the household's turmoil. Welcome home, Mrs. Reynolds. Rebecca stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding Garrett's. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken accusations and secrets pressing down between them. Where is she? Rebecca asked quietly. Garrett stiffened. How did you know? Your text said we needed to talk. I assumed it was about. She hesitated. About Charlotte. But your face tells me there's something else. Her gaze sharpened. What's happened, Garrett? Before he could answer, the patter of small feet on the marble floor drew their attention. Ellie appeared at the top of the grand staircase, still in her pajamas despite the late morning hour. She froze when she saw Rebecca, her small hand gripping the banister. Rebecca swayed slightly, her face draining of color. William stepped forward instinctively, ready to catch her if she fainted. My God, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ellie descended the stairs slowly, her eyes never leaving Rebecca's face. When she reached the bottom, she stood before them, unusually solemn. You're the woman from my dreams, Ellie said simply. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth, stifling what might have been a sob. Without another word, she turned and rushed toward the sitting room. Garrett nodded to Mrs. Peterson, who had appeared in the hallway, silently asking her to look after Ellie. He found Rebecca standing by the window, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if holding something in or keeping something out. How could you? She demanded, her back still to him. How could you bring a child that looks like her into our home? Do you have any idea how cruel that is? Rebecca, Garrett said carefully, I didn't seek her out. She appeared at our door, and there's more to this than I don't want to hear. It Rebecca spun to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Our daughter is gone, Garrett. Finding a look-alike won't bring her back." "She's not just a look-alike." Garrett's voice was low, controlled. "She knows things, Rebecca. Things only Charlotte would know. She found your journal hidden under the floorboard. She knows the lullaby you wrote. She recognized your music box and can hum the second half of its melody, a melody I've never heard." Rebecca paled further. That's not possible, Doctor. Bennett ran a DNA test. We're still waiting for results, but he found the same star-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. The exact same mark Charlotte had. Coincidence? Rebecca whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus discovered there was an investigation at the hospital when Charlotte was born. Something about irregularities in the maternity ward. Garrett took a step closer. "You were contacted about it, but you kept it from me." "Why?" Rebecca's composure crumbled. She sank onto the sofa, her shoulders shaking. "You don't understand. You can't possibly understand." "Then help me understand," Garrett pleaded. "Because right now, all evidence points to Charlotte having a twin sister that you somehow knew about but never told me." "It wasn't like that," Rebecca whispered. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus, who appeared at the doorway with a file in hand. "DNA results," he said grimly. "And there's something else. Rebecca has been making calls to Brookhaven Psychiatric Center for months, including 3 calls the week before Charlotte's accident." Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. "You've been investigating me." "I've been investigating Ellie's origins," Marcus corrected. "Your name kept appearing in places I didn't expect." Garrett took the file, scanning the results with a racing heart. The clinical language couldn't obscure the stunning conclusion. 99.9% probability of identical genetic markers between Ellie's sample and Charlotte's archived medical records. "She's Charlotte's identical twin," Garrett said, his voice hollow with shock. "Our daughter, our other daughter." He looked up at Rebecca, whose face had gone eerily calm. "Did you know? All this time, did you know we had twins?" Rebecca stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "I want that child out of this house by tonight. Call social services. Call whoever you need to, but she cannot stay here." "Rebecca, I won't discuss this further. Not now." She headed for the door, then paused. "The funeral nearly destroyed me, Garrett. I won't survive losing her twice." As Rebecca disappeared up the stairs, Garrett and Marcus exchanged troubled glances. "She's hiding something," Marcus said quietly. "Something big." "Find out what it is," Garrett replied, his gaze following his wife's retreat. "Whatever it takes." Evening shadows lengthened across Garrett's study as he faced Rebecca across his desk. After hours of tense silence throughout the house, she had finally agreed to talk. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white with tension. "Start from the beginning," Garrett said, keeping his voice level despite the storm of emotions within. "No more secrets." Rebecca drew a shaky breath. "I was so excited when we found out I was pregnant. Remember how we painted the nursery together? Yellow because we didn't want to know if it was a boy or girl." Garrett nodded, the memory bittersweet. "The delivery was complicated." Rebecca's gaze grew distant. "There were more staff than normal. Dr. Lawrence seemed tense. I was in so much pain. But before they gave me the sedative, I heard one of the nurses say something about 2 heartbeats. She looked up, meeting Garrett's eyes. "When I woke up, you were there, holding Charlotte. You looked so happy. But I kept asking about the second heartbeat, and everyone, the doctors, the nurses, they all denied it. Said I must have been confused from the medication." "Why didn't you tell me?" Garrett asked softly. "I did. Don't you remember? You said the same thing they did, that it was just the drugs or my imagination." Hurt flashed in her eyes. "After a while, I started to believe it myself, but I couldn't shake this feeling, this emptiness. So you investigated on your own? Rebecca nodded. For years, I hired private investigators. I researched cases of hospital negligence. Eventually, I traced a nurse who had been present during the delivery. She agreed to meet me, but she was frightened, said people were watching her. Did you meet her? I tried. The day before our appointment, she died in a car accident. Rebecca's voice cracked. The police ruled it an accident, but it felt convenient. Marcus, who had been silently taking notes in the corner, looked up sharply. What was her name? Nancy Winters. She worked in maternity for 20 years before suddenly resigning a month after Charlotte's birth. Marcus made a note. I'll look into it, Rebecca continued. After that, the hospital approached me about irregularities in their maternity ward. They wanted to conduct DNA tests, but by then I was terrified. What if there had been another baby, our baby, and something had happened to her? What if she hadn't survived? I couldn't bear the thought, and I didn't want you to suffer that knowledge too. Tears spilled down her cheeks. So I declined the investigation. I told myself that Charlotte was healthy and perfect, and that should be enough. I tried to move on, but you couldn't, Garrett said, realization dawning. That's why you became so overprotective of Charlotte, why you were always anxious, always checking on her. Rebecca nodded miserably. The thought that I might have lost a child, or worse, that a child of mine might be out there somewhere alone, it haunted me. The therapists called it obsessive anxiety, prescribed medication, and the calls to Brookhaven Psychiatric Center. Rebecca stiffened. I had a breakdown after finding Dr. Lawrence's name on a list of consulting physicians there. It seemed too coincidental. My therapist recommended I speak with a specialist at Brookhaven. Did you ever meet with Dr. Lawrence again? No. Rebecca's response came too quickly. Her eyes darted away, a tell Garrett recognized from their early years together. Rebecca, he pressed gently, please, the whole truth. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. There's something you should know about Charlotte's accident. Garrett felt a chill. What about it? It wasn't. Rebecca's voice faltered. She turned to face him, her expression a mask of grief and guilt. Charlotte didn't die in that accident, Garrett. The room seemed to tilt. What are you saying? She disappeared from the car. The accident was real. I swerved to avoid hitting a dog, but when help arrived, Charlotte wasn't in her car seat. She was just gone. Rebecca's voice broke. The police thought I was hysterical, confused from the impact. They searched everywhere, but there was no trace of her. You let me believe our daughter was dead, Garrett whispered, horror spreading. Through him I had to, Rebecca cried. They were watching us. They said if I told anyone the truth, if I involved the police, they'd make sure both girls disappeared forever. Who? Who threatened you? Rebecca shook her head frantically. I've said too much already. Don't you see? Ellie showing up here, it's not a coincidence. It's a warning. They know we've found her, and now they'll come for both of them. As if summoned by her words, the doorbell rang, its chime echoing ominously through the silent house. William's footsteps echoed in the hallway. As he approached the study, Mr. Reynolds, he announced, his normally composed face tense. There are representatives from Child Protective Services at the door. They have documentation regarding Miss Ellie. Garrett's eyes met Rebecca's, hers wide with fear, his narrowing with suspicion. Did you call them? He demanded. No, Rebecca whispered fiercely. I swear, Garrett, this is exactly what I was afraid of. In the foyer, two professionally dressed women waited. The older one stepped forward, extending her hand. Mr. Reynolds, I'm Sandra Mercer from Child Protective Services. This is my colleague, Dana Willis. We're here regarding a child we believe is in your custody, Eleanor Miller. Garrett shook her hand automatically, mind racing. May I ask what this is about? We've received information that you're harboring a child who was illegally removed from her foster placement. She handed him a document. This is a temporary custody order. We're authorized to return Eleanor to state care until her case can be properly reviewed. There must be some mistake, Garrett said, scanning the paperwork. Ellie came to us on her own. Her previous guardians were arrested for child trafficking. Ms. Mercer's expression remained professionally neutral. That case is still under investigation. Mr. Reynolds, meanwhile, you have no legal right to keep this child. Where is she? From the top of the stairs came Mrs. Peterson's voice, tight with concern. Mr. Reynolds? Miss Ellie is asking what's happening. All eyes turned upward, where Ellie stood beside the housekeeper, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes widened at the sight of the visitors, immediate understanding crossing her face with an awareness no 7-year-old should possess. Please, she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Don't let them take me. What followed was a blur of bureaucratic inevitability. Despite Garrett's protests, his promises to seek emergency foster certification, his offers to have his lawyers review the paperwork, the outcome was predetermined. Without legal custody, he had no grounds to keep Ellie. I'll get her things, Mrs. Peterson said, her voice breaking. Just her rabbit, Ms. Willis replied. State-provided clothing will be issued at the temporary housing facility. Rebecca remained, eerily quiet throughout, standing apart, arms wrapped protectively around herself. When Garrett caught her eye, silently pleading for support, she looked away. As Ellie was led toward the door, Garrett knelt before her. Listen to me, he said urgently, hands on her small shoulders. This is temporary. I'm going to fight for you. I promise I will find a way to bring you home. I know, Ellie whispered, with that strange certainty that defined her. Then, her voice rising with sudden panic as Miss Mercer took her hand. Don't let them take me again! The word again hung in the air like a thunderclap. As they led her out, Ellie clutched her rabbit tighter, and something slipped from its worn seam, a small, tarnished locket. It fell to the marble floor with a tiny clink that somehow echoed louder than all the adult voices combined. Rebecca gasped, stepping forward instinctively. That's... Garrett retrieved the locket, its familiar weight in his palm bringing a rush of recognition. He'd given it to Rebecca on their first anniversary, a heart-shaped pendant containing a tiny photo of them on their wedding day. Years later, Rebecca had placed a picture of newborn Charlotte inside, replacing their wedding photo. She'd worn it constantly until the chain broke 3 years ago. Ellie looked back from the doorway, her eyes meeting Garrett's with an impossible, ancient wisdom. I've always had it, she said simply. After the CPS workers had driven away with Ellie, Garrett stood in the driveway, the locket clutched in his fist, watching until their taillights disappeared. When he finally turned back to the house, he found Rebecca standing in the doorway, her face ashen. That locket, she whispered. I put it in Charlotte's jewelry box the day before the accident. It was the original photo, our wedding day. I'd had it repaired as a surprise. Her voice faltered. How did Ellie have it? Before Garrett could respond, Marcus appeared behind Rebecca, his expression grim. We need to talk, now. I found something about Dr. Lawrence, and it connects directly to Rebecca. The social worker's car smelled like artificial pine and old coffee. Ellie sat in the back seat, her rabbit, Mr. Whiskers, though she'd never told anyone his name, clutched tightly against her chest. The women in the front spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Ellie closed her eyes, not wanting them to see her tears. The past week at the Reynolds mansion had been the first time she'd felt safe, truly safe, in as long as she could remember. Now that feeling was slipping away, like sand through her fingers. You'll be at Brightwood Children's Center just temporarily, the woman named Sandra was saying. It's a nice place with other children your age. Ellie didn't respond. She'd heard such promises before. Her mind drifted back to the miller's house, a small, dirty place that smelled like cigarettes and spoiled food. She'd never had her own room there. Sometimes there were other children, but they never stayed long. Mr. Miller would take pictures of them and make phone calls late at night. Special merchandise, he'd call them, when he thought they couldn't. Here, this one's got the blonde hair and blue eyes you wanted. Premium price. Ellie had been different, though. They kept her longer than the others. Not for regular sale, Mrs. Miller had once said. This one's spoken for. At night, Ellie would dream of another girl, a girl with her face, her hair, her eyes. In the dreams, they would reach for each other through a glass wall, their fingertips almost touching. "Find me," the other girl would whisper. "Come home." Then came the night when the dreams changed. The other girl had been crying, scared. "They're coming," she'd said. "You have to find him now. Find Daddy." The next morning, Ellie had woken with absolute certainty about what she needed to do. While the Millers slept off another night of drinking, she'd packed Mr. Whiskers and the few possessions she had into her school backpack. She'd taken the emergency $20 bill Mrs. Miller kept in the coffee can and walked to the bus station. She couldn't explain how she knew which buses to take, or how she knew the address, or how she managed to slip past the security gate at the Reynolds estate. She just knew, the way she knew other things, like the hiding place behind the bookshelf or the star-shaped birthmark on her shoulder that sometimes seemed to tingle when she thought about the other girl. The car slowed, pulling into a circular driveway before a large brick building with a playground visible around the side. Brightwood Children's Centre looked cheerful enough, with colourful murals on the outer walls and neatly tended flower beds. Inside, a woman with kind eyes and grey-streaked hair introduced herself as Mrs. Carter, the director. She showed Ellie to a small room with 2 beds, explaining that her roommate was currently in class. "You'll start classes tomorrow," Mrs. Carter said. "For now, why don't you get settled? Dinner is at 6. Left alone, Ellie carefully placed Mr. Whiskers on the bed, making sure his stuffing wasn't spilling out from the seam where the locket had been hidden. That locket had been her secret treasure for as long as she could remember. She didn't know how she'd gotten it. It had always just been there, sewn into Mr. Whiskers for safekeeping. She went to the window, looking out at the children playing in the yard below. They seemed happy enough, laughing and chasing each other, but Ellie felt no desire to join them. She didn't belong here. That night, after a dinner she barely touched, Ellie lay in bed with Mr. Whiskers, listening to the steady breathing of her roommate, a quiet girl named Zoe, who had barely spoken 2 words to her. "I'll find my way back," Ellie whispered to Mr. Whiskers. "He promised he'd come for me, and I believe him." She closed her eyes, hoping to dream of the other girl again. Her sister, she was certain of it now. Instead, she dreamed of the woman with the sad eyes. Rebecca. In the dream, Rebecca was younger, holding 2 babies, her face streaked with tears as a man in a white coat took one of the infants away. "It's for the best," the man in the white coat said. "One healthy child is better than 2 at risk." Ellie woke with the first light of dawn, her pillow damp with tears. She went to the small desk in the corner of the room and found a piece of paper and crayons. Carefully, she began to draw. 2 identical girls on either side of a glass wall, their palms pressed against it. Behind one of the girls stood a tall man with kind eyes, Garrett. Behind the other stood a shadowy figure, and watching from a distance was a blonde woman, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. When Mrs. Carter came to bring her to breakfast, she found Ellie still working on her drawing, adding careful details with an intensity unusual for a child her age. "That's lovely, Ellie," Mrs. Carter said. "Who are the people in your picture?" Ellie looked up, her blue eyes solemn. "My family," she answered simply. "The one I'm going back to." Rain pelted the windows of Garrett's study as Marcus spread photographs across the desk. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp that cast long shadows across their grim faces. Rebecca sat opposite them, her posture rigid, eyes red-rimmed from hours of confrontation. "These are surveillance photos from Brookhaven Psychiatric Center," Marcus explained, pointing to a series of images. "Taken 3 months ago. That's you, Rebecca, meeting with Dr. Lawrence in the garden courtyard." The photos clearly showed Rebecca seated on a bench beside the grey-haired doctor Garrett had seen in previous photographs. Their postures suggested an intense conversation. "You said you never met with him," Garrett said quietly. "That was a lie." Rebecca's hands trembled as she reached for the photos. "You don't understand. I had to meet him. He was the only one who knew the truth." "Which is what exactly?" Garrett's patience was wearing thin. "Our daughter is out there in state custody while you drip-feed me half-truths." "Enough, Rebecca, all of it, now." Rebecca took a shuddering breath. "After Charlotte's disappearance, I received an anonymous call. The voice said they had both our daughters, and if I went to the police, they'd disappear forever." She looked up, meeting Garrett's gaze directly. "I was instructed to report Charlotte as dead in the accident, to prevent any investigation." "Why would you agree to that?" Garrett demanded. "Because they sent me this." Rebecca reached into her purse, withdrawing a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of Charlotte, clearly taken after the alleged accident, holding a current newspaper. "Proof of life," they called it. They said as long as I cooperated, both girls would remain safe. Garrett stared at the image of his daughter, his heart contracting painfully. Both girls! They claimed they had Ellie too, though they never sent proof. Rebecca's voice broke. "I didn't even know her name until you told me." Marcus leaned forward. "And Dr. Lawrence? What's his role in this?" Rebecca's expression hardened. "He orchestrated everything. The pregnancies at Riverside Memorial during that period were part of a study he was conducting, unofficially, without hospital approval. Something about genetic predisposition in identical twins. When I began investigating, I found other families with similar stories. Twins separated at birth, one child given to the parents, the other supposedly stillborn or lost during delivery. In complications, he was stealing babies," Garrett whispered, horror dawning. "For what, research?" "And profit," Marcus added grimly. "I found financial records showing payments from a company called Gemini Futures to Dr. Lawrence, millions over a 7-year period. The company was registered to a shell corporation that dissolved 3 years ago." Garrett's mind raced. "The private detective you hired years ago, the one who tracked down the nurse, what else did he find?" "Names," Rebecca said. 5 families who gave birth at Riverside during Dr. Lawrence's tenure, all with similar experiences, complications during delivery, rumors of twins, one child unaccounted for. The detective was building a case, gathering evidence. Then he disappeared." Her voice dropped to a whisper. 3 days later, Charlotte had her accident. Marcus pushed another document across the desk. "I found this in Dr. Lawrence's personal files. It's a research protocol for something called the Gemini Initiative. Twins separated at birth, raised in controlled environments to test nature versus nurture theories. One twin placed with the biological family, the other with participant. Families selected to create specific environmental conditions. The Millers," Garrett said, pieces falling into place. "They were part of this experiment, creating a deprived environment to contrast with Charlotte's privileged upbringing." "Not just that," Marcus said grimly. "According to this, the twins were monitored for signs of paranormal connectivity, shared dreams, intuitive knowledge of each other's experiences, emotional synchronicity." Rebecca nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Charlotte started having dreams about her mirror friend when she was 4. I thought it was an imaginary friend, but she knew things she couldn't possibly know, details about places she'd never been, experiences she'd never had. The same way Ellie knew about the hiding place, the locket, the music box, Garrett whispered. Marcus gathered the documents with a determined expression. I've contacted Judge Harmon. He's reviewing our evidence for an emergency custody hearing. And for Ellie, but more importantly, he's issuing search warrants for Brookhaven and Dr. Lawrence's private residence. Charlotte, Garrett said, standing suddenly. If what Rebecca says is true, if she's alive, then where is she now? Rebecca looked up, her eyes reflecting a desperate hope. Dr. Lawrence has a property in the mountains, a research retreat. He called it. That's where the photo of Charlotte was taken. I recognized the stone fireplace in the background. Do you know where this property is? Marcus asked sharply. Rebecca nodded. Lake Evergreen, about 3 hours north of here. Garrett was already reaching for his coat. Call Judge Harmon back. Tell him we need those warrants now. And contact the state police. We'll need their help. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca caught Garrett's arm. There's something else you should know. Her voice was barely audible. According to Dr. Lawrence's research notes, the connection between the twins strengthens with proximity. If we find Charlotte, we might be able to use that connection to find Ellie too, Garrett finished, a spark of hope igniting within him. Let's bring our daughters home. A convoy of unmarked police vehicles wound its way up the narrow mountain road leading to Lake Evergreen. In the lead car, Garrett sat tensely beside Detective Sarah Chen, who had been assigned to oversee the operation. Marcus and Rebecca followed in the second vehicle, while state police tactical units brought up the rear. Remember, Detective Chen cautioned, we're operating on a limited warrant. We can search the premises for evidence related to child endangerment and medical fraud, but we need to proceed carefully. Garrett nodded, though patience was the furthest thing from his mind. Somewhere ahead, possibly in the secluded property, they were approaching. His daughter might be waiting, a daughter he had mourned, buried, grieved for. The thought was almost too overwhelming to process. What exactly should we expect when we get there? Chen asked. According to Rebecca, it's a large lodge-style retreat with several outbuildings, Garrett replied. Dr. Lawrence uses it for specialized research with a small staff. She wasn't allowed inside during her visits, always meeting him at a gazebo near the lake. And you believe your daughter Charlotte is being held there against her will? I believe, Garrett said carefully, that my daughter didn't die in an accident, as I was led to believe, and that Dr. Lawrence is responsible for separating her from our family, just as he separated Ellie at birth. The property came into view as they rounded a bend, a sprawling cedar and stone lodge nestled among tall pines, with a breathtaking view of the lake. Several smaller cabins dotted the surrounding area. The place looked peaceful, almost idyllic, betraying nothing of the dark purposes Garrett now suspected it served. As the vehicles pulled into the circular driveway, a middle-aged woman emerged from the main building, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm at the sight of the police. Behind her, a tall man appeared, the same steel-rimmed glasses and clinical demeanor that Garrett recognized from photographs, Dr. Alan Lawrence. Detective Chen approached, warrant in hand. Dr. Lawrence, I'm Detective Chen with the State Police. We have a warrant to search these premises. Dr. Lawrence's expression remained impassive as he glanced at the document. This is a private research facility. We have sensitive work ongoing. I must insist on speaking with my attorney before allowing anyone access. That's not how warrants work, Doctor, Chen replied coolly. You're welcome to call your attorney, but we're coming in now. As officers began to approach the building, a flash of movement caught Garrett's eye. A child's face in an upper window, quickly pulled back from view. His heart lurched. Charlotte, he whispered, without waiting for the officers. Garrett sprinted toward the building, ignoring Chen's shout of protest. He burst through the front door into a spacious, modern interior that belied the rustic exterior. The woman who had first greeted them tried to block his path. "Sir, you can't just—" Garrett pushed past her, heading for the staircase he'd glimpsed. Through the open door. Behind him, he was vaguely aware of Rebecca entering, of Marcus explaining something to the officers, but his focus had narrowed to a single purpose: finding his daughter. The upper hallway branched in two directions. Garrett hesitated, then heard a small sound from the left, the creak of a floorboard perhaps, or a stifled breath. He moved toward it, opening doors as he went. A bedroom, empty, a bathroom, a linen closet. Then, at the end of the hall, a door with a small brass lock installed on the outside. His blood ran cold at the implication. "Charlotte," he called softly, approaching the door. "Charlotte, are you in there?" Silence, then a small voice. "Who's there?" The voice, so achingly familiar, sent a jolt through Garrett. With trembling hands, he slid open the lock and pushed the door open. The room beyond was comfortable, but clearly a prison, a child's bedroom with colorful furnishings, but barred windows and no interior doorknob. And there, standing beside a small desk covered with drawings, was a golden-haired little girl in a blue dress. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Despite having prepared himself for this moment, the sight of her, alive, breathing, real, knocked the air from Garrett's lungs. She was thinner than he remembered, her hair longer, but her eyes were the same. Charlotte's eyes, Ellie's eyes. "Daddy?" she whispered, uncertainty in her voice. Garrett fell to his knees, opening his arms. "Charlotte?" She hesitated just a moment, then ran to him, her small body colliding with his in an embrace that shattered and rebuilt his world in a single moment. He held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her tears dampen his shoulder. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "Ellie said you would." From the doorway came a strangled sob. Rebecca stood there, hands pressed to her mouth, her entire body trembling. "Charlotte?" The little girl looked up, then broke from Garrett's embrace to run to her mother. "Mom!" As the family reunion unfolded in tearful embraces, Detective Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression somber. "Mr. Reynolds, we've found documents, lots of them, and there are other children here, 5 of them, all with similar stories. And Dr. Lawrence? In custody," Chen confirmed. "But there's something else you should know." She hesitated. "According to the staff, he has a partner, someone who financed the entire operation. We're still trying to identify them." Garrett looked at Charlotte, now wrapped in Rebecca's arms. "We need to find Ellie, now." Charlotte looked up. "I can help," she said with quiet certainty. "I always know where Ellie is." The fluorescent lights of the Brightwood Children's Center cast harsh shadows across the administrative office, where Director Amelia Carter sat across from Judge Harmon, her expression troubled. "This is highly unusual," she said, reviewing the emergency custody order. "The child has only been with us for 2 days. Our protocols typically require—" "These are exceptional circumstances, Mrs. Carter," Judge Harmon interrupted gently. "The evidence presented to the court is compelling enough to warrant immediate action." In the hallway outside, Garrett waited, with Rebecca and Charlotte, the latter clutching her father's hand with a mix of excitement and trepidation. After being examined by medical professionals and interviewed by child psychologists, Charlotte had been temporarily released into her parents' custody, pending further investigation. A miracle of legal maneuvering orchestrated by Marcus and the Reynolds legal team. "Will she remember me?" Charlotte whispered, looking up at Garrett. "It's been so long since we talked in our dreams." "She'll remember," Garrett assured her, though his own heart raced with uncertainty. The bond between the twins remained a mystery to him, something beyond his understanding, yet undeniably real. The office door opened and Mrs. Carter emerged. "We're bringing Ellie down now," she said. "I should warn you that she's been quite withdrawn since arriving here. Don't be discouraged if her reaction is subdued. They were led to a small meeting room furnished with comfortable chairs and cheerful paintings. Charlotte immediately went to the window, peering out at the playground below. "This is where I saw her playing yesterday," she said with certainty, though she had been miles away at the time. She was sitting on that swing, all alone. Footsteps in the hallway drew their attention. The door opened and a social worker entered, leading Ellie by the hand. The little girl's eyes widened as she took in the room's occupants, her gaze moving from Garrett to Rebecca before landing on Charlotte. For a breathless moment, the twins stared at each other, mirror images separated by mere feet instead of miles, seeing in person what they had only glimpsed in dreams and visions. "You're real," Ellie whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Charlotte stepped forward hesitantly. "I told you I'd wait for you." Something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a recognition beyond words. Then, as if choreographed, they ran to each other, colliding in a fierce embrace that seemed to release years of separation and longing. Garrett and Rebecca watched, transfixed, as the twins held each other, whispering rapid exchanges that no one else could hear. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, only the profound reunification of something that should never have been divided. "They're sharing memories," Rebecca murmured, tears streaming down her face. "Look at them." Indeed, the girls were speaking in half-sentences, picking up each other's thoughts midstream, laughing at private jokes, completing each other's gestures. It was as if they had never been apart. When they finally separated, Charlotte turned to her parents. "Ellie knows things," she said urgently, "about Dr. Lawrence, about the others." Ellie nodded solemnly. "There are more of us, more twins. Some of them are still hidden." Judge Harmon, who had been observing quietly from the doorway, stepped forward. "Ellie, would you be willing to tell us what you know? It could help other children like you and Charlotte." Over the next hour, Ellie shared details that left the adults stunned: names, locations, the structure of Dr. Lawrence's operation. She described how the Millers had been paid to create a controlled environment of deprivation, to contrast with Charlotte's privileged upbringing, how they reported regularly to researchers who monitored both twins' development. "The bad doctor said we were special," Ellie explained, "that our connection was stronger than the other twins. He wanted to study us longer, but then Charlotte found out too much, and they had to take her away." "Found out what?" Garrett asked gently. "About me," Ellie said simply. "She saw a file on Dr. Lawrence's desk when she went for her checkup. It had my picture in it. That's when she started looking for me in her dreams on purpose. And that's when they decided to separate you." She looked at Rebecca. "They made you choose." Rebecca paled. "Choose." "Between telling the truth and keeping us safe," Ellie explained with a child's direct simplicity. "They said if you told anyone about the twins, bad things would happen." By evening, the legal wheels were turning at unprecedented speed. Judge Harmon issued a temporary custody order placing Ellie with the Reynolds family, while state prosecutors began building cases against not only Dr. Lawrence, but the network of collaborators Ellie had identified. As they left Brightwood, the twins walked hand in hand, occasionally exchanging glances that contained entire conversations. In the car, they sat pressed against each other as if afraid that any separation, even of inches, might become permanent. "Are we really going home?" Ellie asked, her voice small but hopeful. "All of us together?" "Yes," Garrett promised, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're all going home." As the car pulled away, Rebecca glanced back at the facility. "It's not over," she said quietly, so only Garrett could hear. "Dr. Lawrence has powerful friends, people who invested millions in his research." "Let them come," Garrett replied, watching the twins whisper and giggle in the back seat. "This time, we'll be ready." Golden afternoon light bathed the gardens of the Reynolds estate, where white chairs were arranged in neat rows and fragrant spring flowers adorned every surface. 1 year had passed since the twins had been reunited. A year of healing, adjustment, and legal battles that had finally culminated in today's celebration. Garrett stood before a small gathering of their closest friends and family, handsome in a light grey suit, his expression serene as he watched Rebecca walk toward him in a simple ivory dress. Behind her came Charlotte and Ellie, identical in lavender dresses, each carrying a small basket of rose petals. The twins moved, in perfect synchrony, their steps matching without conscious effort. As Rebecca reached him, Garrett took her hands in his. The officiant smiled warmly at the assembled guests. "We gather today not just to witness Garrett and Rebecca renew their vows, but to celebrate the reunification of a family that refused to be broken by forces that sought to tear them apart." The ceremony was brief but profound, a recommitment, not just between husband and wife, but to the extraordinary family they had nearly lost. When they exchanged rings, the twins stepped forward, each holding one of the bands, presenting them with solemn pride in their role. Afterward, as guests mingled on the terrace, the twins slipped away to their favorite spot by the koi pond. They sat side by side on the stone bench, their reflections rippling in the water below. "Do you still have the dreams?" Charlotte asked, absently braiding a small section of her sister's hair, a habit they'd developed over the past year. Ellie nodded. "Sometimes, but they're different now, not sad anymore." "Mine too," Charlotte agreed. "I think it's because we don't need them the way we used to. We have each other for real now." From the terrace, Garrett watched his daughters, still marveling at the bond between them. Dr. Bennett had called it twin telepathy amplified by shared genetics and trauma, but such clinical terms failed to capture the profound connection the girls shared. Rebecca joined him, following his gaze. "They're incredible, aren't they?" "Beyond words," Garrett agreed, slipping an arm around her waist. The past year had transformed Rebecca too, the haunted look in her eyes replaced by a hard-won peace. The guilt she had carried for so long had finally begun to fade as she accepted that she too had been a victim of Dr. Lawrence's manipulation. The legal proceedings were still ongoing. Dr. Lawrence awaited trial on multiple charges, while his financial backers, a shadowy group of wealthy individuals obsessed with the paranormal potential of identical twins, were being investigated for conspiracy and kidnapping. 3 other sets of twins had been reunited with their families, while investigations continued into several more cases. "Are you ready?" Garrett asked softly. Rebecca nodded. "They need this. We all do." Later that afternoon, the family drove to Oakwood Cemetery, where a small headstone marked the spot of Charlotte's supposed burial. They stood together before it, the twins holding hands between their parents. "We thought we might remove it," Garrett explained to the girls. "But your mother had a different idea." Rebecca knelt beside the headstone. "Instead of a marker for something we lost, we thought it could become a memorial for what we found, and for all the children still waiting to come home." The groundskeeper arrived with a new stone to replace the old one. Carved into its surface were the words, "For the lost who are found and those still searching, may all journeys lead to home." That evening, as Garrett tucked the twins into their beds, side by side in the expanded bedroom that had once been Charlotte's alone, Ellie looked up at him with her solemn blue eyes. "Even when it was bad at the Millers," she said quietly, "I always felt like someone loved me, even when I was alone. I never felt completely alone." "You were never alone," Charlotte confirmed from her bed. "I was always with you. I just didn't know how to find you. But you did find me," Ellie said, "through our dreams." "And Daddy found us both," Charlotte added, smiling at Garrett. As he kissed them goodnight and turned out the light, Garrett paused in the doorway, watching as the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling began to shine, now numbering 74, one constellation for each twin. "Daddy?" Charlotte called softly. "We're going to be okay now, aren't we?" "Yes," Garrett promised. "We're going to be more than okay." As he closed the door, he could hear them whispering to each other, secret twin conversations that would continue until they fell asleep. In their dreams now, they no longer reached across impossible distances. Instead, they explored new worlds together, their connection no longer a lifeline of survival, but a bond of shared joy. Downstairs, Rebecca waited for him on the terrace, gazing up at the real stars emerging in the twilight sky. "They're asleep?" she asked as he joined her. Almost, still talking, Rebecca smiled. "They have a lifetime of conversations to catch up on." Garrett took her hand, feeling the weight of their new wedding bands, symbols of a love that had weathered the unimaginable and emerged stronger. "So do we," he said softly. And as night fell gently around the Reynolds estate, the house that had once echoed with grief now hummed with the quiet miracle of a family made whole again.